Thank you all for joining us. I'm Jeremy Kahn. I'm the AI editor at the US business publication Fortune. I also wrote a book on AI called Mastering AI, a survival guide to our superpowered future that came out a year ago. And we've got an amazing panel here, hosted by PRO-RATA, and I'm going to hand it over. I'll introduce my panelists first, and then Bill Gross, the CEO and founder at PRO-RATA, is going to say a few words to start us off, and then we're going to kick it off to the rest of the panel. Bill is immediately to my left. To his left is Azim Azar, who is the founder and CEO of Exponential View, which is a fantastic sort of board advisory, corporate advisory firm that also does amazing thought leadership. If you're not a subscriber to Azim's newsletter, you should be. It's fantastic. And then to his left is CEO and co-founder of Cloudflare, Matthew Prince. I think you all know Cloudflare, but Cloudflare protects most of the internet's traffic. Extremely important for internet all over the world and maintaining the reliability of the internet. The topic today is on responsible AI and the importance of responsible AI as AI gets adopted more widely by enterprises all over the world. Bill's going to kick us off with a few thoughts on how PRO-RATA fits into kind of responsible AI, but we're going to talk fairly broadly. We're going to talk among ourselves as a panel. I'll put questions to them, but then we're going to come out to you because we really want to make this a conversation. And so please think of any comments or questions you want to ask, and we'll come to you after a little discussion up here. Bill, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. It's really an honor to have all of you here. I was just at DLD, and I heard a talk by Stuart Russell, who's a professor of AI at Berkeley. And he gave a very fearful talk about some of the dangers of AI, about how we can have runaway AI and things we need to do about that. That's one aspect of responsible AI. Another aspect, one small one, is the one that we're working on, which is to try and make AI fair to creators. What my goal for today is to bring out all the other ideas and important areas we need to focus on, and we'll share a document with all of you afterwards. So the comments that you bring to the party and all the comments from the panel we'll summarize, and because we have the emails of all of you, we'll share that with you afterwards, as well as a video of this, and so on. So just to frame a few of these things, I think that we will look back on 2025 as a turning point in the history of civilization. Maybe it'll be 2026, maybe it'll be 2027, but it's this decade for sure. It's not because AI achieves AGI magically in 2025, or that it's perfect, but that it's become so wildly pervasive and so incredibly useful that it's just becoming infrastructure. It's going to be like electricity, maybe already is like electricity, and that's just embedded into everything, embedded into the fabric of our lives. So that really is a major, major turning point with a new technology that's taken off that fast. Think about how recently ChatGPT was released, how much it's progressed, how it feels like it might be leveling off, but still how incredibly useful that it already is. And it's causing major, major disruptions. I'm thinking about the past Davoses I've been at. I've been coming here for almost 20 years. We talked about climate, we talked about inequality, and now we're pretty much this year talking about AI and Greenland, like two very different things than what we used to talk about here in Davos. And the AI focus here is just extreme, and it really is because it's touching everything. It's going to shake up business in ways bigger than we thought. And of course, people are looking for the way it's going to make the productivity difference and cause GDP change, and I think it will, but we'll talk a lot about that on the panel. But just to frame some of the scary parts, or parts where we need to have responsibility, Stuart was talking about how with Arabian horses 2,000 years ago, when they were breeding Arabian horses to run faster, they would pick the two fastest horses and mate them, and they'd get a little bit faster horse. And they'd pick the next two fastest horses and mate them, and they'd get another faster horse. They were sort of doing a reinforcement learning type of system to get an outcome, but they couldn't explain exactly how it worked. They didn't know the physiological or biological methods that they were achieving it. It just was happening because of selection. Well, a lot of that same thing is happening with AI. We're doing reinforcement learning to get a result that we want, but it's not fully explainable, and that's why there could be lots of danger. He also talked about the dangers that we could have to humanity. He talked about what is the human risk we would be willing to take. Would it be, maybe we want extinction level event of humanity to be 0, but actually the extinction level event of humanity is not 0. It's maybe 1 in 100 million because of an asteroid that might hit or something else that might happen in hundreds of millions of years. So he was saying, let's say we even accepted 1 in 100 million risk of humanity being wiped out. We already accept a 1 in 1 million risk per year of a nuclear accident, and we have regulations to make sure that that doesn't happen. We have risk that airplanes will crash, and we have regulations to make sure that doesn't happen. So what regulations or other things should we put in place to make sure there's not a 1 in 100 million risk of humanity being wiped out? Well, he said when you talk to the leaders of the AI companies right now who are spending trillions of dollars to scale it, to reach AGI, they think there's something like a 1 in 10 risk, or a 1 in 5 risk, or a 1 in 3 risk. And that's from the actual people who are doing it. So we're off by a factor of 10 million between what we maybe would accept as humanity and what they're actually seeing right now. And that's a big area of responsibility that we need to do something. So he posed to us, well, what can we do about that? How should we put safeguards in place? And that's a question I also put to all of you. So lots of challenges, lots of areas. I want to hear from the panel other areas where we need to add responsibility to AI, other things that we can do, and then I want to hear from all of you so we can make a document up that puts all of our thoughts together. Thank you very much. Let's get started.
Great. Well, that's a scary introduction, Bill. I'm not sure I'm going to sleep well.
I was scared when I heard it. I was scared when I heard that last week.
And I think we'll get into this area of responsibility. But to start, I think I want to start with the area of responsibility that you've been working at PRO-RATA and that Cloudflare's been working on, which has to do with, the ethics and responsibility around where is the data coming from that is being used to either train AI systems or that AI systems are using to produce an answer when they need up-to-date information. And as I'm sure you all know, so far most of this data has simply been scraped from the internet without permission, without any regard to copyright. There have been some interesting lawsuits. There have been a couple big settlements so far on this. But the problem is that, if anybody who has a website knows, bots are continuing to scrape those sites at a very high rate. This content is still being ingested, and no one's really being compensated for it. There are some partnership deals out there, and we can talk maybe about how some of those have been structured. But for the most part, this data is still being scraped, essentially taken for free and used to train AI models and used to provide chatbot responses. And at PRO-RATA, I know the whole foundation of the company was to try to come up with a system by which creators of content could be fairly compensated for the use of that content. And maybe you can just talk about, Bill, to set us up on that aspect of responsibility, how this has been going, how it's working, and why it's so important that AI not be trained on essentially stolen data.
Well, I want to talk about the way that we're doing it. Matthew, I want to talk about what you're doing as well. About 2 years ago, right after New York Times sued OpenAI, I was trying to figure out some way that there could be fair compensation as opposed to only lawsuits. And the idea that we came up with was pretty obvious. It's similar to what YouTube does and what Spotify does, which is share revenue with creators. The reason it's harder to do with AI is it's not completely obvious whose content was used. So we worked on an algorithm to be able to read the output of generative AI, break it down, and figure out who the sources were and in what percentage they were important to the answer. And then we would calculate that number, and then we would share 50% revenue of any revenue earned, advertising or subscription, with that original creator. And at the beginning, it took us about 6 months to sign up the first 5 publishers. We signed Fortune.
Yeah, I was going to say, I should have said Fortune is a partner.
Well. We signed Fortune, we signed Exponential View, we signed The Atlantic, we signed Time, we signed Universal Music Group, and we signed those first 5. And we announced the company in about August of 2 years ago. And then about 6 months later, we had 100. And just as of now, we have more than 1,000 publications. So 1,000 publications have agreed that a revenue share is important. A 50-50 revenue share would be viable. And now we have to convince the AI companies to do it, because we're doing it, and we're sharing 50% of our revenue. But now we have to convince the AI companies to do it, and we haven't convinced them yet. So that's a big uphill challenge to convince them they need to share. But exactly as you said, you go type in a search at Google, and in the AI answer at the top, they're lifting that from someone else's website. They give you the answer immediately, which is fantastic, but that website doesn't get any of that revenue. And that really is horrific, because that will lead to creators not existing anymore. It'll just be AI slop eventually if all of creators have no incentive to create that content.
Great. And Matthew, I want to come to you next, because I know Cloudflare has had similar concerns, and you've tried to set up a system to block bots and then to allow publications to white label some of them and to set terms under which they're going to allow their content to be scraped. How has that system gone? I know it's been implemented in the last year. Can you give us an update on that?
Sure. So Cloudflare's in a kind of interesting position here. We don't really have a dog in the fight. We're not a AI model company. We're not a content creator. We sort of sit between those things. And 80% of the AI companies are our customers, and more than 20% of the web sits behind us. So as we saw this, initially, publishers would call us and say, hey, there's this new threat, it's AI. And I remember just rolling my eyes, being like, why are media companies such Luddites? Why are they always afraid of the next thing? And finally, I got convinced to just go pull the data and see what's changed. And we have really good data going back more than 10 years on what has gone on. And what has changed is, if you look just at Google, 10 years ago, across the entire web, for every 2 pages that Google would scrape, they would send you 1 visitor. And that was the compensation, that visitor, for them taking your data and creating search. And you could do with that visitor, you could sell them a subscription, you could monetize it through advertising. Over time, because of a lot of changes, originally the answer box, now AI overviews, that has gotten worse to the point that now it's for every 20 pages they scrape, they send you 1 visitor, and that's the good news. In OpenAI's case, it's 1,500 pages scraped for 1 visitor. In Anthropic's case, it's 36,000 pages scraped for 1 visitor. And I think that the future is going to look more like Anthropic than it is like original Google search. And so if the business model of publishing has been, how do we drive traffic and then monetize it through subscriptions or ads, that business model is going to go away because the AI experience is better. But here's the encouraging thing. The encouraging thing is that the AI companies know that they need that content, and they actually need new and original content. And I actually think that there might be a path forward where we actually come up with a real golden age of journalism, golden age of content creation, because that's what the AI companies want. And so you have to look structurally at why, and Bill's doing amazing work, and we hope that that what he's doing is successful. But you have to ask, why are the other AI companies not paying? And it has to do with a real kind of structural problem in how the market has developed. How much more of the web do you think Google sees than OpenAI? Any guesses? Answer is 3.2 times as much. For every page that OpenAI sees, Google sees 3.2 times more pages, right? And what has that meant? Like, we've all just watched over the last several months as Gemini has massively leapfrogged OpenAI, and you can see OpenAI's numbers stalling and a bunch of challenges that are there. And people say, well, it's because Google has great chips, or they have better researchers, they have other things. I don't think it's any of those things. I think they have access to more data, and whoever has the most data is going to win. And again, OpenAI is the second best that's out there. How much more of the web does Google see than Bing or Microsoft? 4.8 times as much. How much more do they see than Anthropic? 6 times as much. Common Crawl, 10,000 times as much, right? Literally, that's the case. Why? Because everybody has given Google special permission to be able to access the web, because they were the original patrons of the web. They were the ones that created the monetization model. But the challenge is, if you think about it, why was OpenAI started? It was because Elon and Sam were terrified that Google was going to win the entire game. And so they started it as a counter to Google. And so I think what's happening now is they are quite rightly saying, I can't pay for data when my biggest competitor is getting it for free. And if we want to solve this problem of publisher compensation, we have to do one of 2 things. We either have to say Google needs to play by the same rules as everyone else, which means that they have to separate their crawl for search for their crawl for AI.
Which they have not done.
No.
Which is why
have fought vociferously against this, and there are regulators who are thinking about that. Or we have to figure out how to get all the other AI companies up to the level of Google. And where I'm actually optimistic that they're willing to pay, if an individual publication comes and says, pay me for my content, you should. I think that is less compelling to the OpenAIs and Anthropics than say, hey, pay for the right to have as much access to data as Google has. And that's something that I think we're actually going to be successful in getting the AI companies to pay for. And I actually think they'll pay more to catch Google than they would just to license the content.
That's interesting. Azim, I want to get you in there. you're less directly involved in this debate in some ways, but you do have content you're putting out there. You are a partner of PRO-RATA, and you're just a great thought leader in AI in general. What's your view of how this is developing? Are we going to move to a different model on where data comes from and how publishers are compensated?
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Bill, for inviting me to be on here. I don't have many regrets in my business life, but one of them is that in 1997 you offered me a job, which I turned down, and so it's just a thrill to actually sort of share a stage with you all these years later, and I'm just imagining who I might have been if I joined Idea Lab back then, but thank you very much. I'd like to take the perspective of the consumer and the end user as a way of looking into this, because of course we're all part of this, and what's going on is that we enjoy the experience that we get from using AI systems, and we recognize, I'm sure many of us do, that the large language model, the transformer, is not the last word in the AI systems and technologies we'll use. That will change over the coming years, but the behaviors that we see from consumers today, I think, are an inkling of how we will want to act. And that is to be able to put in a query into deep research and 3 or 4 minutes later have a referenced deep dossier ready for us. Or that is to be able to put in a query saying, I need size 9 running shoes from Brooks, and not have to visit 30 different retailer websites, all of which have slightly different user experience standards and checkout blocks. It's not a nice, pleasant user experience, consumer experience, and that sense that effectively I want my UX to be assembled on the fly for me as I ask the query in a way that works for me is going to be incredibly compelling, whether it's invented by Sam Altman and Johnny Ive or by another Idea Lab startup or somewhere else. That feels very, very compelling. We already see that emergent behavior. So if you're a publisher or if you're in e-commerce, you need to start to think that the web is not going to be about direct consumption from human eyeballs, but increasingly, and in many use cases, consumed by machines that are going to assemble the experience for me. Now, I think there will be exceptions in certain classes of publishing and data, and there will be the classic barbell, the big and the brilliant, the Financial Times, the New York Times, and the weird and niche and hyper-specialist. But the mid of media, as it has done for the last 20 years, is going to struggle in the face of these changing consumer preferences. So I'd be thinking about, how do I make this make sense in a world in 3 or 4 years where, as many of us probably do today, with the exception of my very best sources, the New York Times, Financial Times, which I flip up on the app, I'm increasingly consuming mediated through an interface. The AIs are terrible at flight bookings yet. I mean, I know we'll have reached AGI if they can book my particularly weird preferences when I travel transatlantically themselves. But they will start to get there. And I think for publishers, part of the challenge is that this is a trivial problem for e-commerce, because you have to pay for the shoes. It's not trivial in the sense that actually any advantage you had in shopping experience, consumer experience, is going to get competed and arbitraged away and will disappear behind the agentic layer. But for publishers, I do think that it is a little bit of a challenge, because the model of the ads for eyeballs that Google has supported for 20 years will start to shift.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good point to double down on. But what I would say is that I actually think we can find a solution for publishers. My wife and I own a small local newspaper in Park City, Utah. I am amazed. Okay, I run Cloudflare, so we locked all the content down. Bots can't scrape it. Blah 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 blah. I think we might actually make more off AI licensing deals next year than we do off advertising, which is pretty crazy, right? And that's because actually the quirky and the weird is what is being rewarded. And if you have Park City newspaper, there's a lot of people who want to travel to Park City, so they want to know what the new hot restaurant is. And so that's actually really valuable data for AI companies. And that's why I actually think that we might get to something which is a new age of journalism. The type of journalism that is just, frankly, what the New York Times does, which is tell the exact same story that the Wall Street Journal does, but with a slightly different perspective. I think that's going to go the way of the dodo. But if the more local, quirky, weird journalism is what's going to get rewarded. And the best example of this is Reddit has essentially the same number of tokens, same amount of content as the New York Times. New York Times has been publishing a lot longer. Reddit is a higher volume, but Reddit got 7 times as much. And that's the public number. The private number is actually larger for their content than the New York Times did from the same AI licensing deals. Why? Because if you don't have the New York Times, you just tell AI to read the Wall Street Journal and rewrite it as if it's a New York liberal. And you laugh, and again, the New York Times is an amazing journalism organization, but at some level, that's what that fine distinction is what a lot of media has been made on. What I would say, though, I am actually optimistic about media. Where I am worried deeply, and you referenced this a little bit, is what happens to small businesses in a world of agentic commerce. Think about the small businesses that you do business with today and why you do business with them. It's because you have a personal relationship and some emotional relationship. Your AI agent isn't going to have that relationship. And what I fear is that agentic commerce is going to be a massive consolidating force where there are going to be huge conglomerations that are going to be the things that are set up to best serve agents and that business. And so, I think Bill's starting out with these horror stories of, are we going to end humanity, or is everyone going to lose their job? Are we in a James Cameron movie? Those are fascinating academic topics, but I think they're actually somewhat of a distraction. I think that the bigger thing is that AI is going to fundamentally change the business model of almost all of our businesses. Yeah. And as that business model changes, we've got to make sure that we're not leaving behind the people who can't afford the $100 a month subscription to OpenAI, right. The small businesses that don't have the tools to be able to actually build
I think there are these very interesting sort of business model and societal questions that we're going to have to address. And I think we're already starting to see, some of the companies that have a kind of consumer-facing profile, like OpenAI, move to an advertising model, which already moves you to engagement being the thing that you're trying to maximize to some degree. And that leads you down some of the dangers that we saw with social media. And I think those are also kind of these big ethical and broadly speaking, issues around responsibility that we're going to have to look at. I don't know, when you've been talking to companies about this, because you talked to all the different AI vendors, Bill, what are they saying about some of these questions about, are they even worried about their societal impact in that way?
No, I don't think they are. But the two thoughts that you just shared, both of you, gave me the following thought. For 25 years, Google was the way we interacted with the world. And a whole series of businesses learned how to optimize around that. Both the SEO businesses, individual creators, websites, as you said, e-commerce sites, and all that. So now we have this paradigm shift. We have a meteor that just struck everything. And now everybody who is in business needs to figure out how to optimize in this new model. What you said, Matthew, actually gives me some hope that when you were talking about the case of agents maybe giving more power to the big, but I think in the last world, the last 25 years, individual creators, influencers, other people came up with clever ways to make their brand stronger than some of the big brands. The Mr. Beast being stronger than NBC. So I think that if you're that individual, small e-commerce player, you're just going to have to figure out how to innovate in that agentic world so that your humanity shows up and your humanity comes through.
Well, and it's amazing. Like, if you think that there's a prescription that is the right way of doing it, take 3 really smart companies that are in the same business, all of the biggest retailers in the world, Walmart, Target, Amazon. Yeah. There's agentic AI strategies are radically different. Walmart, throw the doors open, everyone can come in, your agents can buy from us, which again, I think in the short term maybe is the right strategy. Yeah. Over the long term though, does Walmart's brand survive? Like, what does a brand mean in a world of agentic commerce? Amazon, exact opposite. They are literally suing companies that are trying to do agentic commerce through their system. Target has, I think, the worst strategy, which is you can use agents, but you have to come to our website to use them. I mean, that's not going to work, right? They're going to fall into eventually the Walmart strategy. But those are 3 incredibly well-resourced companies that have no idea what the right strategy is.
That sort of proves that an innovator will come up with a 4th that's maybe better than those 3.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But I think
I want to get Azim in here. Azim, go ahead.
Yeah, so as I say, in a world where the artificial abundance emerges, what remains distinct is the rarity of the human interaction. And so the example of the local store that you now access through an agent feels to me, on the one hand, yes, it could be existential for them, but it does also feel that we've already thought through what their response is. Well, when the shoes do arrive, there's a personal message and a reminder, and then there's an ability for me to tell my agent that this is a preferred place to go to. We know the agents, the chatbots already take our preferences in case, but what we're having to do is change the way in which we run our businesses, change the point at which we extract the value or deliver the value for the customer. And I think for publishers for whom this is particularly relevant, that's quite challenging because you've already been somewhat deracinated after 20 years of competition.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I come back to the point that Matthew made, which is, your Park City newspaper has relevance the way that a Reddit forum has relevance because it's alpha, right? It's distinct signal in the response. And for many media businesses, you have to ask yourself the honest question, which is, what of our output is genuinely alpha? What of our output moves the dial in its uniqueness, distinctiveness for our particular audience? And Jeremy, for Fortune, I think we can see that with your writing and the writing of some of your other colleagues. It's not always the case with a lot of media, and I'm not going to pretend that's an easy choice for the CEO of a business.
Yeah, no, it's definitely difficult. We're gonna come to the audience for commentary in a minute. I want to sort of broaden out and talk about responsibility, some of the broader themes that Bill was mentioning at the outset. One of the ways that responsibility gets reflected, I think, within businesses is around governance, and particularly as we move to these more agentic systems, we start using AI agents. And I actually want to ask Azim, because I know you're from reading your newsletter, a great user of AI, an early adopter of AI agents, but you also have a responsibility to your readers, to the people who work for you, that these agents aren't making mistakes, that they aren't causing damage to the business. How have you, because you run it's a fairly small business, but it's a good sort of emblematic example. How do you try to govern those agents that you have started to use?
We use a lot of, let's call them agents, but maybe they're agentic workflows, maybe they're just clever prompts. There are a couple of principles. The first is that they are designed by the person who needs to use them. So this is the person who best understands the task at hand, what needs to come in, what needs to go out, where things can go wrong, what good looks like and what excellent looks like. And the team has the training and they have the budget to go off and do that. The second thing that we've done is we have actually solved the hallucination problem in Exponential View, 100%. There are no hallucinations. Every person takes personal responsibility for the output. And it's as simple as that. You don't need any amazing science. So if I go out and say, I did this actually. We made this mistake. I described a current senator as a senatorial candidate, knowledge cutoff date problem, and then I wrote a note as to why this had happened. We've established a path of personal responsibility, and then we do that both internally and externally.
Great. And Matthew, I want to ask you, because you run a much larger company, and I'm sure you're using agents. I'm sure the developers within the company are using AI to help code. How have you sought to this aspect of sort of governance as a way to deliver responsible AI from Cloudflare?
I think the thing that everyone gets tripped up on in this space is that we expect machines to be deterministic. You push a button, the screen turns blue. You push a button, the screen turns blue. You push the button, the screen turns not blue, red. Something's broken, right? And so we have trained product managers, engineers to build systems that are very much deterministic. And as a cybersecurity company, which is a big part of what Cloudflare does, we're trying to figure out what are all the branches on the tree and how do we make sure that we're predicting them and protecting them. And with machines, typically, that's been possible. What's hard about AI is that AI is the first time that we've built a machine that is at least pseudo-non-deterministic. And the closest analogy is not other machines. The closest analogy is you. The closest analogy is people. And so I think the smartest company that I interacted with, Robin Vince, who's the CEO of BNY, I went and saw him, and he's like, at BNY, we've actually got agents, but we treat them as employees. They get an employee number, they get an email address, they get a quarterly review, literally. We can fire them, we can promote them, and we actually act as if they are team members of ours, and we use all of the governance that we use to regulate people, which are also non-deterministic, maybe pseudo-non-deterministic. The time will tell. And that is exactly what I think we try to do, which is instead of thinking of this as a machine, think of it as a teammate, and go so far as what they do at BNY, which is literally give them an employee number, give them a review, give them feedback.
Right.
I don't want one sense to that.
Go
So
ahead,
we have an org chart for individual contributors and the agents they work with, and they have to spec them up explicitly what they expect them to do and how well they're performing, but we don't give them email addresses yet.
And all the ones at BNY are named Eliza.
Right.
Just because, anyway, it's a good reference.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's good. I don't know if you want to get on this, Bill, in terms of within PRO-RATA, how you're using these agents or agentic workflows, and how you seek to make sure that the outputs still are of the standard, that it's not putting your business at risk, it's not putting your customers at risk.
Yeah, all of our programmers use all the AI tools, and very often they have to spend as much time checking as maybe the time that they saved. But I love the ideas that you just added there, Matthew, about thinking of them not as perfect, but as imperfect like humans are.
The only thing I'm going to say to problematize this a little bit, and Bill and I were talking about this at the beginning when I arrived today at lunch, and we were talking about some of these things Stuart Russell's worried about, which is these loss of control issues. I talk to all the AI companies all the time, how great their coding tools are. I talk to Cursor and all these guys, and then I try to sort of often ground this by going and talking to people I know who are coders who are using these tools in big businesses. I know a number of people work for big trading firms, for instance. They're using these tools, and I said, well, how are you finding the experience? And for the most part, they're pretty happy with it, except they're starting to see these things that I think Bill Russell's a little bit worried about, which are sometimes Claude, or any of the coding agents you use from these leading companies. Sometimes they'll tell you if they've done something that they haven't actually done. You might have a workflow and it has to do a certain unit test, and it'll tell you it did the unit test and that the code passed the unit test. And then when you go to deploy it, it fails, and it turns out, well, it didn't pass the unit test. In fact, they never ran the unit test.
You should fire
and worse
that
than that,
agent.
in some cases, you should fire that agent. Is exactly right. But the problem is that agent is very useful a lot of the time. So you have something that's much more.
We've all had employees like that.
But there's sort of not a choice here to go to something else sometimes. And I think also there's this weird thing of you would definitely fire that employee, but in this case you have something that's saving you. 99 out of 100 times is saving you, working and doing really well, but 1 out of 100 times is doing something really bad.
That's what employees are, and I think that what will hold AI back is not the technology. What will hold AI back is that we all have different expectations for what a machine should do than otherwise. Within the last time we've been talking, within 5 miles of here, there was a car accident. Just statistically, that's true.
Sure.
You will not be able to find any information on that car accident, no matter how hard you look. However, if one of those cars had been a driverless car, it would be front page news around the world. Driverless cars today are better drivers than 99.99% of drivers on the road, and yet we hold them to a higher standard and don't let them get deployed. And so I think, again, the moment that we start to think that these are non-deterministic systems, they are going to make mistakes just like humans do, and we build the guardrails with the same way that we do with humans, I think that's a much better model than trying to say, this is a machine that is deterministic and is always going to do the thing right.
Yeah, I think the issue you get into, though, is sometimes with these systems, you're getting very bizarre errors. So you're getting...
Have you worked with people?
All right.
One more thing.
Just come to Barry's any night. It's very bizarre behavior.
One more thing on the driverless one.
Yeah.
There was a great editorial in the New York Times recently by a doctor called "The Human Driver is a Failed Experiment," where he talked about the teens that he sees in the ER in crashes, where he said if you saw this and you compared it to Waymo, you would say, it's ethically important to stop this experiment. And like if it were a drug, in a placebo test, you would stop the trial because too many people are dying in the placebo in the test. And that is exactly as you're saying, Matthew. We hold things to different standards.
And that essay, by the way, is an exact example of the kind of thing that a newspaper needs to do.
Yes.
That is very distinct.
Yes.
Not going to be a clone of something in
No,
another paper.
Good time to go.
Yeah, we're going to go to questions now from the audience. And this gentleman here has had his hand up forever, so please state who you are and what
Okay, so Benjamin Tallinn. I'm pretty much like involved in a lot of things from governmental work to also building companies, etc. So I'm gonna sit down because it's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, no problem.
One problem there, and I guess we are all thinking that the current pace is continuing. I mean, LLMs are pretty much at the end. They're already plateauing. We won't see anything coming. People don't really trust these systems because they can be easily manipulated. Because if information is being fed to it, it's just assuming it. It cannot differentiate between true and false. And I guess this is one of the things that we also need to actually address here, because if agentic AI is coming for commerce, etc., it's very easy to manipulate it. It's coming for news, it's very easy to manipulate it. And I guess this will be not just a technological question, it's also kind of like how much trust or trust economy can be actually in there. Because we will see, and that's already happening, that people don't trust AI outputs because it can be bullshit. I mean, for example, I myself did the test, like, how can I be number one of kind of like the best software in my industry? It took me one day to actually be the best and actually surpass SAP and Microsoft and whatever, but just actually being smart about how they work. And nobody can catch it. So I can actually just open up my publishing and actually make all these fake reviews, and suddenly my sneakers is way better than the other sneakers, because there is no checks and balances in there. So that's also one of the problems with this trust deterioration.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good point about trust, and you've mentioned a couple things about sort of information pollution there. You have AI-created information that's not reliable, that's then getting fed to other AI systems and manipulating them. Azim, maybe you have thoughts on where this is going and how we can actually have these systems so widely adopted by so many big enterprises when there is still this big trust gap in what these things.
I think the question is fascinating in itself, because the question could equally have been, I've been using this for my, to identify cancer targets, as Professor Derya Unumtaz has gone on the record many, many times, and this has advanced my research, having been a cancer researcher for 35 years, by decades. And both views exist in parallel because people's experience of the technology is highly non-deterministic. And I think one of the pieces that is really missing in this market is it's such an important market, but it's a market that doesn't have clear metrics, benchmarks, reference data. It's a little bit like the oil industry before we had West Texas Intermediate as a standard. Everyone claims one thing, and therefore your experience of it is like that. I think that's about the maturity stage of the AI industry right now, because clearly people can have different experiences, but they shouldn't be as different as the ones that we're all party to right now.
Yeah, I think to address what you brought up, as you said, Azim, we're early in this transition. We've got companies spending hundreds of billions of dollars to say they're the best, and there's no one policing them. There will be the equivalent of a Consumer Reports for this that rates them, or people will rate them themselves. In the same way that people chose Google over Bing, over Yahoo search, people learned which one was more trustworthy and reliable over time. I think we need to accelerate that, though, because there is so much disinformation that can be placed out there. But right now, there's no regulator stepping in to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, do we need...
The total truth is about when I see it in a search, I know that some kind of fake website, whatever, like an Indian domain and whatever.
Right.
I don't really trust. But if I go to Financial Times, maybe it's more trustworthy.
Right.
Yeah, we've learned these signals of trust.
Right.
Exactly.
I want to get to this woman just here. Yes. There you go.
Hi, I guess I have a question. I don't even know how to make the question, but I think since we're talking about publishers here and media here, my question would be that how would you identify where to use AI and where to remain human? I recently watched a documentary of the New Yorker's 100 years anniversary. And it was very fascinating that actually they have a department called a fact check. So every line, they actually have person calling the number, identifying whether this is a fact. I think this cannot go away. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like Azim in some ways has implemented that with his use of AI, and that he's saying that the human is ultimately responsible. At Fortune, like we it's interesting. Like there's very few publications that actually still have fact checkers as a separate role, but they've often made us sort of ultimately responsible for every word that we put into print, of course. So then we have to fact check very carefully our own things. You could, I guess, set up agents to fact check other agents. I don't know how reliable that is. I'm curious, Matthew, are you seeing anything like within you're not a publisher, but within Cloudflare, where you're having a kind of agentic systems checked by other agentic systems, or where you're saying it doesn't matter how this was produced, whether it was AI or human, ultimately this is the human in charge, and this human, the buck stops with them.
So everything, I didn't hear a question from you, but everything you said I radically disagree with. And anyone here who thinks that like AI is going to just go away, like you're wrong. It's just not. It's a better experience. It's a better experience, and it's going to be more and more involved in more and more of our lives. A bunch of CEOs came out last year and said 80% of the code that we produce is generated by AI. That was a complete and total lie from everyone when it happened. That said, this year, I will predict that 80% of the code at Cloudflare is generated by AI. It has improved that much in the last 12 months, and we're seeing it. What are we doing about it? I'm 51 years old. I'm a dinosaur, right? When we started Cloudflare, I wrote a bunch of the code, all those things. I don't know how to use these tools as well. So what are we doing? We think it is so important that you have to have people who are trained on it, where most people are saying, oh, we're going to stop hiring our junior employees. We're doing exactly the opposite. We're about 5,000 employees. We're hiring 1,111 interns this summer because we think it's the only way that we can actually get the DNA involved. So we can fight it, we can push back against it, we can talk about when should humans be involved or when should they not be involved. The reality is that for a number of tasks today, AI is better at it than humans, driving, identifying cancer, frankly, writing code, doing checks, those sorts of things. We can find little exceptions where it makes mistakes, but those are tiny. And the reality is that we should be leveraging these tools to be getting better and better and absolutely checking against them. But this is the future, and it's coming, and you've got to get on the train.
All right, I'm going to go over here. This gentleman has his hand up for a long time.
Thank you so much. I'll be quick. Yesterday, the CEO of Scale AI mentioned this example of how they managed to pay astrophysics professor $50,000 in the matter of a week just due to the value of their labeling. So please don't hate me for what I'm about to hypothesize and predict into the future, but if we can look at publishers as excellent data collectors, labelers, and publishers of that data, is it crazy to assume that over time, each of us over here would be able to become a news source, a labeler of their own world, providing that to the AI, protecting us from slop, and making sure that, everybody here can be a whistleblower, investigative journalist. Of course, the question remains how that would be safeguarded if what I'm saying is the truth. But, well, right now, isn't the fact that we have publishers just a matter of a structure that used to have great utility in the past, but in the future, it might be substituted somehow?
Totally.
It's an interesting idea about aggregation being done in a very different way. Publishing was a way of aggregating information.
So if you talk to the AI companies, what I think is interesting is that for the first time in human history, we've built effectively a mathematical model of all of human knowledge. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. And I think of it as like a giant block of Swiss cheese. And there's a lot of cheese, but there's a lot of holes in the cheese. And what's valuable to the AI companies is filling in those holes. And what's interesting is where those holes are actually the most interesting topics in the world, the things that humanity doesn't know anything about, but maybe you do. And right now, there might not be some traditional media sense, an ability for you to create content that drives, enough traffic to generate enough ad clicks to make that viable for you to sit down and make that your living. But if in the future we actually create incentives for people to fill in those holes in the cheese and they get paid for it, exactly as this researcher did, I think that's actually what the future model is for figuring out how do we support academia, how do we support journalism, and that's what I'm optimistic about. If we can get that right, that we can actually maybe be on the age of a golden age of actual content creation around really interesting new topics.
Yeah. I like your analogy about the Swiss cheese and the holes, and I think those holes are like the alpha that you talked about earlier. That's where the real value is, these nuggets of new information that people don't have, but they want.
Barry Marcus wants to make a comment. He's in the audience. Also a great thinker on AI. So.
And as it happens, I have an article today in Science about swarms of bots undermining democracy, to this gentleman's point, with Maria Ressa, Nick Bostrom, and 20 other people. So in the spirit of correcting misinformation, I want to speak briefly about the driving. I think we could make similar points about others, and then I have a plea for the panel. So on driving, the best data that suggests that driverless cars are better than humans is in San Francisco with Waymo. But you have to, it's almost like apples and oranges to compare that with humans in general. So it costs them some number of billions of dollars to train their system, not just train, but hand wire their system specifically to San Francisco. It still, I think, doesn't go on highways in San Francisco.
It just started going on.
Just started going on highways in San Francisco. It hadn't the last time I was there. It doesn't drive in Buffalo in the snow at all. These are really not comparable. It might actually be true that you are safer on surface streets in San Francisco in a Waymo than in an Uber, maybe. But the general statement that driverless cars are better than humans just isn't true. 99% of the world, you can't even use a driverless car, and there's no data. The plea is, I love all these discussions about IP and business models. I am an advisor to PRO-RATA. I really like what they're doing. But there is a much broader agenda of responsible AI, and it's the title of the panel. There are things like children committing suicide, there's deep fake porn, there is the threat of to democracy of misinformation, there's surveillance and authoritarianism. I think that we need to look at a broader canvas than maybe we did today. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and you bring up, I think on some of those topics, there may be need for regulation. I wanted to ask the panel, because we started talking about it, would there be Bill was talking about would there be a forcing mechanism, around trust, and how right now we don't have one, and maybe one will be developed through market mechanisms. But I'm wondering if we, on some of this, whether we have to short circuit that and have regulation. Matt, do you have a view on whether we need regulation of AI?
Well, so of course there's going to be regulation. What I think we need to make sure is that we're regulating in the right way. The very difficult thing to regulate is outputs. Like, you must not do X, right? That's tough because, again, these are pseudo-non-deterministic systems. And it's really tough in advance to do that. So I think that what we have to do is actually think about it as we regulate this, same way that we regulate the criminal code, where it's actually you're putting standards out which have a little bit of gray area, and that you're going to have that regulation that sits in that space. These systems behave like humans. They are fallible like humans. And in that same way, as we think about regulation, it is different than saying, like, the building code must require this sort of standard of steel and this much weight bearing and those sorts of things. Those are for deterministic systems, whereas for non-deterministic systems, we've actually built regulation which has a little bit more fuzziness, a little bit more flexibility, and I think that that's going to be much more of what good AI regulation is going to look like.
Yeah, Azim, do you want to get on this? And I just want to say that that's true, though there are, the AI companies have taken on voluntarily at the moment, because there is no regulation making them do it, but some standards around how they construct their models and what testing they do. And while that doesn't necessarily, because these are non-deterministic systems, it doesn't guarantee certain outputs, it does shape the probabilities in certain ways, and it may make it less risky than not taking those steps. Azim, go ahead.
I think we have to also recognize that sometimes things take time. I think it's very difficult for anyone in this room to determine whether Waymo has spent too much money in training in San Francisco or not. That's really their decision as a company that's generated lots of cash flow. Unless you think it, as an outsider, they should not be allowed to spend their legitimately earned profits.
It's not that it's too much money. It's that it's not economically. The claim is not that it's too much money per se, but that it would be enormously expensive to do this across the world.
But I think that ignores the history of technology. The first transistor cost $272. There are now billions of transistors in your TV that cost you $400. Technologies get cheaper over time, and they go through a learning curve. And I think that's really important when we start to think about where and how regulation should emerge. What we learned from social media was that we didn't regulate these companies. We didn't intervene, even though there was data about emerging quite early on. But we can also be wrong. I mean, I remember being in Davos in 2024, and I was having to answer the same question about this year being the year of deepfake and elections and democracy dying in 2024. It's very easy to see the risk. It's very hard to get the timing or the etiology of how that risk plays out, which is why I think, to Matthew's point, you need to be a bit careful about how and when you regulate. Yep. There is a clear harm right now with teenage kids that is emerging on chatbots. And you have Anthropic, which will not serve its chatbot to under 18-year-olds. There is clearly a targeted area of intervention that can emerge. And that's not on the AI companies now, that's really on the regulators.
Bill.
Yeah, Gary, I agree with you, and thank you for elevating us above only the publishing part and to the other risks. One example, and Matthew, I agree with you, it's very hard to regulate the outputs, but there are still some things you can do. One example I learned about at DLD was that Stuart was talking about. The companies have red teams that go try and break these things and try and prevent suicide discussions from turning into recommending suicide as opposed to turning you away from suicide. You could regulate that the companies need to share their red team outputs and how much work they've done and how safe they've made it. It doesn't guarantee that it's 100% because, as you said, it's non-deterministic. But sharing what they've done and meeting some bar that every company has to do that in the same way that companies have to do crash testing. Doesn't guarantee that nobody will ever die in a car crash, but they've at least tested this range of boundaries to get to a certain level of safety. And that I think we need to do. And I think I wish we could convince the regulators to be smart enough to figure out how to make a basic standard. Now, it could be that the market demands it and that one company does it philanthropically, I guess, and then shames every other company into matching them. But it would be better if there was some regulation.
All right, this gentleman here has got to come on. Let's get him. The gentleman in the blue shirt.
Yes.
There.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Oh, there's a mic.
There's a mic coming to you.
Yep.
I just want to mention that Sandy Kleiman and Fergus Hay are co-founders of a great company called The Hacking Games, which is really getting traction to attract teenagers to be white hackers rather than black hackers. So you might just want to look that up.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, this woman here, right in front.
So thank you so much. As a mathematician, I think this is super exciting, and it's actually, the models are still simple, and we can do more. There must be a way that the social media effects are happening because that's as simple as math. And that's as simple as data. But if we turn around and look at AI is here to stay, 100% agree. We have robotics, we have energy consumption, we have this cure in healthcare. The world is changing. If we start sending those messages out and tell the teenagers, you've got to get ready. You've got to actually understand what questions you need to ask. You need to learn how to live in that new society. It is coming, it's here to stay, and it's just the beginning. So that little noise about social, and I have teenagers, and I train them well not to look at it, right? Or teach them pluses and minuses. But we are having an enormous revolution. And as a mathematician, it is so simple today, and it's just beginning. And I wonder if you agree and how we need to create that narrative and let everybody come along.
Well, there's one little mathematical characteristic that does worry me, which is that there are only a handful of companies that are legitimately able to build this technology at any scale. And the benefits that you get from technology in particular emerge from the competition that should exist. And one of the things that happens with competition is that, of course, you get a race dynamic of people trying to put out products perhaps faster than they otherwise would. But and I think we see that today with the AI systems. But if you have enough competitors, none of them has enough political power to capture regulators and governments around simple things like safety standards of this example we've just had. And so there is one thing that I would like to be able to see would be a path to there being much more competition at the lower ends of this, because I think it will be better for consumers and it reduces the risk of capture.
Yeah, and I think that's so. One of the things I think is really important is we should be articulating what we want the future to look like. Now, that is the first step we should take before we do regulation. We should articulate what that actually looks like. So what is the future I'm playing for? I am playing for a future where there aren't 5 AI companies, there are 500,000. That's what we have to do. We have to make it easy for anyone to start an AI company. I'm playing for a future where we don't have an enormously consolidated set of media companies, but we have it back to this gentleman's idea of every one of you should be able to be a journalist and be available. And I'm playing for a future where there are businesses that are large and small that are able to compete and win because they provide better service and better products or better things like that. I think when you articulate what it is you want the future to look like, that's the first step in order to figure out then how do you get to that future. What I'll also say is that there are places here where this is turning into some pretty revolutionary things that are making the world better today. So Joe Lamont started Trilogy Software once upon a time, had kids late in life, put them in school, and he's like, this model of education doesn't make any sense. We've got 20 kids, 1 teacher. The only reason we did this was because after World War II, we needed to scale education. It didn't work. The right model is something that's closer to like an Oxford, like tutor relationship. But that's hard to scale, right? It's really expensive to do it. So he started a school called the Alpha School. Which, when he pitched it to me, I was like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. You're going to use AI to teach kids. That doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't want my kids staring at a screen. He said, okay, let's think about it. I have a young daughter. She's pretty precocious. She's very verbal. He's like, what do you do? She's got a 6th grade vocabulary, but she's 4 years old. You read her 4-year-old book, she's going to be bored. I'm like, well, maybe I'll read her 6th grade books. You can't do that. She'll be scared. She doesn't have the emotional intelligence to do it. So I'm like, okay, smarty pants, what do you do? He's like, we rewrite stories about unicorns and rainbows, but with a 6th grade vocabulary for kids like that. I'm like, well, that's pretty smart. He's like, what about this? What's her favorite thing? And I'm like, ballerinas. And he's like, okay, so all the math problems that we do will be all about ballerinas. You've got 9 ballerinas. Each ballerina, you can only have 4 ballerinas per classroom. How many classrooms do you need? She would solve that in a nanosecond because she's engaged in it, and they can actually tailor that for it. And then they can have the curriculum follow the kids as opposed to you having this. And the results are getting, like, they took their program, they took it to the poorest school district in Texas, which was in Brownsville. They took the bottom 10 percentile from Brownsville. They put them through this, and in 2 years, they were performing at the 95th percentile across the board. So that's a way where I do think there are places where AI is actually really driving real results and can actually further what we are doing, and I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, no, I think you definitely need to take this approach of what are the outcomes you're driving towards from a policy perspective, and what's the best way to get there, or within your company. And I think there's lots of examples like that where one area where actually I have a lot of trepidation about the use of AI is as sort of for therapy, as kind of counselors. Although lots of people are using AI that way.
80%.
Yeah, I mean,
80% of queries to OpenAI are therapy.
I have worries about this because actually there's very little research yet that has directly compared sort of the use of AI as a therapist to a human therapist. And I do think there's something sort of very important about the connection a person has with another person in the process of therapy. However, having said that, you have a system right now where there is a tremendous amount of people who have need of a therapist. There's a lot of people with distress or mental health conditions, and very few of those people have access. The question there is it better to provide a chatbot, even if it's not as good, because it's better than providing nothing, which is what we're doing right now. And I think there are a lot of cases like that throughout society. And I think we think broadly about responsibility. That also has to come into it. It's like, right? Yes, in an ideal world, maybe you would not do this. You wouldn't replace the human in that equation. But right now, we're not serving that need at all. And this is a way to serve it.
I actually love the way that you have reframed that, because if we come out of these sort of hallowed halls of Davos or the US, you get to a world where 3 billion people still cook with animal dung, and you get to a world where there isn't the human capital even for the Alpha School. And I've been following some of these experiments in China, for example, where Squirrel AI has a very, very meticulous AI-based tutoring system specifically for maths, but for other things. And the results they get now in large controlled experiments where you can take kids from rural China and they will outperform the kids in the tier 1 schools in the cities, which, as you might imagine, is where the teacher talent gradient leads to, is really, really remarkable. And we have to be a bit careful about applying American standards of what we expect psychiatric or therapeutic care to be in places where there is simply no access at all.
Right. We've got some other comments. This woman here in the pink scarf.
Yeah, thanks. I just have a comment about the Alpha School because I'm a big fan. But it was actually founded, or at least co-founded, by Mackenzie Price, who is one of my closest friends from college.
Yeah, yes.
So I just wanted to throw a shout out
correct.
to Mackenzie.
She is
because
terrific.
she's amazing. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, yes, right here in front. This one right here.
So Matthew, this one's for you. I saw you speak at the Activate conference in April, and you talked about Independence Day, but you couldn't call it Independence Day because somebody else was calling something else Independence Day, where you were going to cut off the internet from AI companies for any net new information. How has Independence Day played out, and what has been the outcome?
Yeah, we called it Content Independence Day. It was July 1st. We pushed a big red button and blocked the bots across all of Cloudflare and did a wide range of publishers from the Associated Press to Ziff Davis and everything in between. And I think it's been pretty interesting to see. What we've seen is that from people like Dotdash Meredith, Condé Nast, some of the biggest publishers, instantly the AI companies were much more willing to engage. The deals that they got were much more favorable in terms of the terms that were there. I think what we did though was we were pretty conservative and pretty cautious. We put up essentially no trespassing signs, but we didn't physically block the bots. And some of the bots are just ignoring the trespassing signs and they're going around it. And the reason that we were conservative was we were concerned that we could block everyone, but we can't block Google because the publishers are terrified that if they block Google, that they're going to drop off search, and that's still a significant portion of their revenue. Google also, if you block their bots, will turn off sometimes all of your advertising, which is incredibly bad.
Yeah, no, I'll just say, unfortunately, we've had this issue where we would like to restrict the bot traffic, but we're very afraid of losing the Google search indexing.
That's exactly right. And so we were worried that if we blocked everyone but Google, we've just handed the game to Google. And so, again, one of two things has to happen. Either Google needs to get regulated in such a way that they have to split their crawler in part, and if this is something you think is a good idea, the jurisdiction around the world that is the most likely to act is the United Kingdom. The CMA, which is their competition board, has found that Google has a monopoly in search, and they're now looking at what the remedies are going to be. One of the remedies they are considering is forcing Google to split search crawl from AI crawl, and if they do that, now we can actually treat Google the same as everybody else. And now Google is on the same level playing field as everyone else. And you say, well, that only affects UK publishers. Well, one of the magical things about Cloudflare is we can take any of your content and announce it anywhere in the world. So we'll just go to wherever the jurisdiction is best for you. So if the UK does that, I think that actually might be the most important thing at leveling the playing field around AI and giving other companies the incentives to do that. And where everyone's a little bit nervous about is the Trump administration going to be pissed if you regulate things like that. What's powerful here is the only company that is against this is Google. OpenAI supports it. Anthropic supports it. Microsoft supports it. Everybody supports it except Google. And I think that this is the way that we can actually make the AI ecosystem the fairest.
Right.
All right,
go ahead.
A follow-up to this, because
Okay.
I'm curious about whether what we're discussing here is, sorry, have I messed up? I'm curious about what we're discussing here is a interim set of proposals that enable business models as they currently are to work, and if they are actually the bridge to the business model bill that you discussed with the gentleman over there about filling in the Swiss cheese. And I'm just trying, I know we have to hold two things into our hands. We're head at the same time, right? What do we have to do over the next 3 to 5 years versus where does this go? And is this approach a bridge? And I'd just love to know.
I think that in order for you to get to the filling in the holes in the Swiss cheese, everybody has to be paying for the cheese. Like they have to be paying and compensating you. And the problem is if the one company that all the AI companies are terrified of isn't paying, but we make all the AI companies pay, that just doesn't seem fair. And so Google is the big, it's like a Marvel movie. Like the hero from the last movie becomes the villain in the next movie. Google is the absolute hero of the internet over the last 30 years. They enabled it. The internet would not be anything like it was without Google doing what they did. But now they've become the villain, and they're internally struggling to figure out what do we do, because they know that if they keep going down this path, that publishers are going to die. And if they don't have that data, then they can't actually make their models work.
Maybe now that they did.
We know it's hot in here, but there's a protest out there. They're going to open the door in there, and you guys want to take off your coat and relax. It's going to sit a little bit hot in here.
They're protesting Google. No.
Oh, okay.
Every time, well, now that Google has sort of caught up to ChatGPT and maybe gone past, maybe they'd be more open to doing something. But we'll see. I know they're not. We need
Why would you give up your
Yeah,
advantage?
yeah.
Your big
we need
advantage
to
they
bring
have.
back the "Don't be evil." Question back here.
Yeah, I was gonna go this way
sorry.
first.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is the role of investors in making AI more responsible?
The role.
Collaborative.
How can investors help make AI more responsible? Azim, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that there are so many different investors, and some of them make their choices based on some of those considerations, but ultimately they have a fiduciary duty, and they have to adopt that fiduciary duty. One of the things I would say is that I've done a little bit of early stage investing, not as much as Bill or Matthew, is that you actually never know where a company is going to end up when you get started. And so you actually have to let that play out a little bit. And I'm a real believer that these things need to force their way out within the competition of the market and the rules that we as societies have agreed. And if there are bad outcomes that emerge from that, then we need to do something with the rules that have been set, or we have to make sure that there's still adequate competition. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're really just delegating these decisions to men and women who will make essentially arbitrary decisions.
Yeah, but investors can make choices too, and you don't have to invest in a company that's got a very exploitative way of gathering data or is inventing a model with absolutely no safeguards or controls. So I mean, those are choices investors can make. It does mean they'll probably get funding from someone, but as an individual investor, you don't have to fund.
Yeah, but I think the way that investors think about that is less about, does this make me feel icky? I'm sure if it makes them feel icky and you're a private investor, you don't want to hang around that company for a decade. But much more in the context of, does this expose the company to extreme liabilities that will therefore mean we won't get a return on our investment? And that is a much, much more trusted approach, I think, to ensuring you get good outcomes, because that's what we're trying to do when we talk about the big companies. We don't want to depend on the CEO of one of these 5 companies waking up and feeling benevolent day after day after day, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they won't.
Yeah, no, and it's actually interesting. I just had a conversation last week with somebody who was sort of pushing for external auditing of the foundation model companies. But he was saying that one of the things that's driving this is actually insurance. So if you have insurers who think, oh, if you deploy a model that is in some way irresponsible and results in massive harm, and you've taken no steps to prevent that from happening, should I underwrite your business continuity policy? Should I, underwrite your D&O insurance? And some insurance companies are exploring the idea of maybe saying no, or if I'm going to underwrite this policy, I'm going to actually enforce certain governance around AI. So that's one market mechanism that might come into being. This woman here had a question.
Hi, and good afternoon. My name is Marta, and I'm really privileged to be here to listen to such amazing titans, especially Bill. So having said that, no, I'm honest. So having said that, my question is also related to a bit of geopolitics. So I am Italian, so European, lived in Germany, everywhere. I live now between Saudi and UAE. I'm one month per year in Latin America and US. And so my question, as an investor and a deployer of AI, especially for the energy side, my question is, do you see a global blueprint to scale up responsible AI, or do you have, a receipt different based on, geopolitics, or let me put it this way, based on the different part of the world?
I would like to see a global blueprint. We need that. And Stuart Russell, who I mentioned earlier, and I'll send out his talk to all of you here, has put together an organization to try and focus on that. But we just need someone to move. What you said earlier, Matthew, I think is brilliant about, let's just get the UK to do something, because that will push other people to do it. And maybe we don't have a global movement to start, but we end up with a global movement.
Well, I will say though that I think that it's really important that the world doesn't make the same mistake with AI that we made with the internet, which was basically put it all in the U.S. And I think it's important that when an AI in the UK responds and says, you ask it, what color is this? And it responds, it should spell color C-O-L-O-U-R, whereas a US should spell it C-O-L-O-R. And that's a silly example, but I do think that making sure that we have models that are specific to the various regions and cultures around the world is super important. And then I would just also make one plug where I am very acutely aware of how humans are more fallible than AI. If the waiters could not take all the food from that table, I'm starving.
Can I, which one is it? We've got all.
Yeah, you got it.
Does this one work? I don't know. Does it work?
Yeah,
Does that work? Okay, it works.
If you want to see.
I'm not very good with it. Can I swap? Yeah, one I can trust. Yeah, I trust this one. So getting a kind of a global consensus will be pretty tough. I speak as a Brit. The Brits are kind of terrified about Trump right now, and the notion that they might allow the CMA, even though it's independent, to go as far as that when there's all this other stuff going on, I think is up for dispute. I would say that outside of these top 3 or 4 companies that we think about, there is a long tail of models that are being used. If you go, I was talking to somebody who's coming out of Sierra Leone, they're using a local model there, talking to another entrepreneur building from Kenya across sub-Saharan Africa, and they have localized models there. Speaking to an American entrepreneur who's doing something in healthcare, full top-to-toe stack in open source, open weight models. Needless to say, we do spend our time thinking about fundamentally like OpenAI and Google because of their scale. But I think as we think about how AI rolls out across every industry, every sector, and every geography, it's not clear to me. But it's a British way of saying I believe that OpenAI and Google won't have a dominant share of that market as it emerges. Now, it may well be that Google and OpenAI have the dominant consumer share for one particular class of chatbot, but you might have said the same thing about MySpace before Facebook, and Facebook might have said the same thing about Facebook before they had to buy Instagram. So some of these things still feel like there are dynamics out there to play, and I would also just encourage people to look at what's happening in other parts of the world, outside of the US certainly and Europe.
Great. That's a great note. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, but this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to thank Matthew, Azim, and Bill for hosting us all, and thank all of you for coming and for all of your insights. Bill was going to compile these and send them out to everyone here at the end of this, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.